How should the Christian teacher respond when the school expects them to teach a lesson they disagree with? If they outrightly refuse, they may face disciplinary action from unsympathetic heads of school and a lack of support from their union. Or how should the employee behave when their company adopts a morally questionable policy in order to make more profit? If they speak up, they may be overlooked for promotion at best, or find themselves looking for a new job at worst. Or closer to home. How does the church member respond when their leaders make decisions that are unbiblical and driven by ego? To challenge them outright might cause division within the body. It might distress sensitive members. What do? The Christian lives in a world which is often governed by godless people making foolish decisions. There's not always a clear way for us to respond to those people or decisions, and much of the Christian life requires wisdom that comes from beyond ourselves. Last time, as we were looking at the book of Esther, we saw how the Jewish people had been thrown into a sudden crisis in the Persian Empire. Ahasuerus, the king, had given authority to Haman the Agagite, and not only the authority but the financial backing to decree the annihilation of the Jewish people. Little did Ahasuerus know that his own wife and queen was herself endangered by this decree. And yet, as Peter helpfully pointed out in chapter 4, it was perhaps for such a time as this that the Lord had allowed Esther to be where she was, beside the king. Here is Esther, the only one in a position to influence Ahasuerus to reverse the decree and to rescue all of God's people. But she made it very clear. Responding in the wrong way was risky. She explains in chapter 4 and verse 11, "All the king's servants and the peoples of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law: to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. 30 days, it seems that Esther, who had so spectacularly won the king's favour before, now has fallen out of favour. And yet she's the only one who can make a difference. And the only way to do so is to literally stick her neck on the line, appear before the king, and hope that that golden scepter is extended. So we're going to look this afternoon at Esther chapter 5, and we're going to see wisdom in action. Specifically, we're going to see the difference between godly wisdom and ungodly folly. So, two things today. Firstly, we see the wisdom of Esther in verses 1 to 8. The wisdom of Esther. Now, after hearing about Haman's decree, Esther had called the Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days. We're not told the specific purpose of the fast, but some sanctified imagination is helpful here. It's likely that this fast was accompanied by prayer, as most, if not all, Jewish feasts and Christian feasts fasts, I should say. I've got to take out the E. The fasts are for the purpose often of praying. And so at the end of these 3 days, Queen Esther takes off her fasting uniform, her fasting clothes, her clothes of mourning, if indeed she had been wearing any, like Mordecai was, and she puts her plan into action, putting on her royal robes. And we see throughout verses 1 to 8, that she acts in great wisdom. We read first about her preparation in verse 1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarter, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. Yes, it was a dangerous business to go and stand before the king uninvited. And knowing this, knowing that her husband has refused to invite her into his presence for 30 days, she realizes that she is in danger. More so, she's in danger because she knows that her husband was a volatile and unpredictable man. Just ask his ex-wife. So instead of rushing into his presence presumptuously with more haste than anything else, Esther takes time to make herself up. She literally puts on royalty, the Hebrew says, without any hint that she had been in mourning for her people since hearing of Haman's decree. She prepared to stand before the king. She didn't act without thinking. She made suitable preparations. But we also read about her prudence, verses 2 to 4. When the king saw Esther standing in the court, she won favour in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even half of the kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. Can you imagine being Esther standing in that courtyard, in the inner courtyard, with the king sat on his royal throne, and as she is waiting for what his reaction is going to be as her husband sees her? Must have been excruciating, mustn't it? It must have been with buckling knees and a lump in her throat and butterflies, if not elephants, in her stomach. Yet to her relief, and it must have been a relief, Ahasuerus extends his golden scepter, indicating that he welcomes her, that he was pleased to see her. She's not going to die. She can live. If you go to the History Museum, not the Natural History Museum. If you go to the British Museum in London, and you take the east stairway, okay, this is a little tip. East stairway, don't rush up the stairs into another room. Go up the stairs, and as you reach the top, turn left where the balcony is, and look at the wall from where you've just come. And you will see an artifact which is of a Persian king that has been rescued from the rubble. And in his hand, as he sits on his throne, is a very long scepter. Many historians, and you won't quite read this on the info they give, but you will in the Day One book, A Guide Through the British Museum. Many of the historians believe this to be Ahasuerus with his scepter. And here he welcomes with his scepter Queen Esther. But more than this, As she comes into his presence, he asks her, what can he do for her? And even offers her up to half of his kingdom. I wonder what you would say at that point. If you were to visit King Charles and he says, I'll give you up to half of my kingdom, what do you want? And don't forget, his kingdom doesn't just stretch to the United Kingdom, it stretches overseas into, whether we call it the Commonwealth anymore, I don't know, but we're into other countries too. Half of my kingdom I'll give to you. Well, will you make the rash decision of speaking too soon? Because Esther knows this is probably just her king being a little bit sentimental, saying things he doesn't quite mean yet. And so she needs to check that he really means what he's saying. I'll give you anything you want. And so prudently, she invites the king to a feast that she has prepared. Remember, this is a break from her fast. But who else is invited? Her enemy, Haman. She knows two things. Ahasuerus' words are rarely without superficiality. And two, both he and Haman have egos that need stroking. And she acts accordingly. Read about her prudence. But then thirdly, we read about her patience, verses 5 to 8. Verse 6 to 8 even. No, we'll go 5 to 8. We'll read that just again. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther answered, my wish and my request is, if I have found favour in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfil my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. And so, what do we see? We see for the first time King Ahasuerus acting on the word of his own wife. This is an important thing that you need to take note of, that the narrator wants us to take note of, because now we're seeing tables turning. No longer is Ahasuerus' word and Haman's word dictating events. Now Esther's word is dictating events. Get Haman. Bring Haman quickly. On whose word? On the word of Esther. And as they sit, Haman comes quickly as the king commands. And I wonder again, what would you do? Perhaps as the meal begins, you've got something to get off your chest and you get it off quickly. Esther's more patient than that. Esther's more prudent than that. Esther lets them eat and lets them drink and waits for Ahasuerus to extend the offer again. Perhaps with a little bit more meaning this time. Perhaps with a little bit more conviction on this occasion. Esther, my dear, what can I do for you? Esther, my love, what do you want? What do you desire? I have power to give it. I'm able to give it. I'm willing to give it. And Esther is almost at the point of saying it. My wish and my request is that you come to another banquet and I'll tell you tomorrow. She's patient. She's prudent. She's prepared. She's thought about this. She's acting wisely, isn't she? She's acting wiser than perhaps any of us might do in that situation. She's not going to rush in, and we know what type of people rush in, don't we? Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Esther does not rush in. She presents herself for the occasion. She knows what her husband likes. She knows what sort of what the occasion is, and she's not going to turn up in rags. She turns up in royalty. This is not Esther the Jew. This is Esther the Queen. With dignity, with splendor. She enters his presence and she's worked him out. She knows what he's like. And she acts in accordance with her understanding of what her husband's like. She knows what button not to push. And she knows the way to his heart. And she acts accordingly. And she's patient. She's not going to let this moment slip through her fingers just because she can't wait to say what she's thinking. David Firth comments, wisdom is not only knowing how to present oneself, it's also a matter of knowing when and how to speak. Good impressions cannot simply be based on appearance. More than that, wisdom involves having some idea of how things need to be done, even if flexibility is still needed. Because what we also perhaps could notice is just the way she speaks to the king. She doesn't say, come on, you're coming to my feast tomorrow. She says, if it pleases you, let him think it's his idea. How many of us would have rushed into this situation because we were outraged by Haman's behaviour? You see, when we are faced with difficult situations, foolish decisions by godless leaders, it would be wise if we followed the example of Esther. That we would take time not only to understand the situation, and there is a great need for Christians to take their time to understand the situation before rushing in and writing to the ET or eNow with their great opinion on things. But we would understand the situation. And not only the situation, but the people who are at the heart of the situation. That we would be those who seek to act accordingly in a way that doesn't make matters even worse. Jesus told his disciples that they should be as harmless as doves, but as wise as serpents. It's a tragedy when many Christians today can be more often as harmless as serpents and as wise as doves. But we should also seek to be gracious. So I do think this is worth noting. Esther brings to her table her enemy. Esther doesn't even show passive aggression to her enemy at this point. But she welcomes him as a guest to her table. We should be gracious to our enemies. Because after all, just as Esther invited her enemy to her dinner table, hasn't the Lord invited his enemies to his table? And just in case you're wondering what I mean you. See, at best it may move them to repentance. At least, it may, as the Apostle Paul says, heap burning coals on their heads. How we need to be reminded that the Christian is to be gracious even to those who despise them and hate them and do all kinds of evil towards them, because this is how Jesus was. The wisdom of Esther. But secondly, let's see the folly of Haman in verses 9 to 14. Because in the remaining verses of chapter 5, the readers are introduced into another meeting. Not a banquet, but we're made to follow Haman as he leaves the feast and meets with friends. Now, at first reading, this seems like a bit of an interruption, and an unnecessary one at that, to the natural flow of the narrative. We would hope that the narrator would just get on with the story and go to the next day's feast. But he doesn't. He wants us to see what else is going on behind the scenes. And its inclusion here serves to highlight, again, even further, the contrast between Esther's wisdom and Haman's folly. And he also shows just how alarmingly dangerous foolish people can be. We notice, first of all, that Haman was quickly angered. Verse 9. And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. So Esther's feast has the intended result on Haman. He comes away very pleased with himself, glad, happy, joyful. He's got no inkling of her true identity, no idea of her connection to Mordecai or to the Jewish people, and he's got no lingering suspicion that she has any ulterior motive inviting him to her feast. He feels honoured. His ego has been stroked. He's a happy man. And just as happy as he is quickly put into a position of anger that boils up inside him. And what's the reason for his anger? He's just been honoured by the Queen and the King. He sat there at a private party in the royal house. And what annoys him the most, what angers him and infuriates him, is that as he walks out of that house and he goes through the king's gate, here's an old man, Mordecai, and he will not honour him. He will not honour him by rising or bowing or stooping or any of it. And Haman cannot get over it. He's fuming. As quickly as he gets, he's happy that he's been honoured by royalty, the two most powerful people in the kingdom. One man, far less powerful than either of those two, and him, not giving him the honour he feels he deserves, infuriates him. Quick to anger. And openly boastful. 10 to 13. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendour of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honoured him, and how he advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. It's first of all quite amazing, isn't it, that Haman restrained himself. We have not seen a lot of restraint from the godless men in this book so far. And yet Haman restrains his anger. It's the one positive about him in this chapter. It's the one positive remark. But so instead he gets sympathizers to draw near to him. I'm sure none of us do this. We're irked about something, and instead of going to the person we're irked with, we get people we know are going to agree with us, and we talk about it to them. The scene is darkly comical. Surrounded by his friends and his wife, he rehearses, he retells, he recounts all the things that he is most proud of. All of the accomplishments he had. Question, Didn't they know? The king has, look how wealthy I am. Look how the king promoted me above all his servants and officials. Who do you reckon Haman's friends were? Paupers? Or maybe some of them who sat in the king's gate as officials and servants of the king? Rubbing it in their faces is what he's doing. And then with his wife sat there, this is the most darkly comical moment I find. With his wife sat there, he recounts how many sons he has. How many sons I have. Did you know? I think she might. It is unnecessary, proud and arrogant boasting. Look how good I am. And more than that, I'm the only man who was invited to Queen Esther's feast, apart from the king. His pride is on full display. And yet he says, none of it means a single thing to me. I'm sure Zeresh loved hearing that. None of it means anything to me. Why? Because there's a Jew sitting in the king's gate who won't bow down to me. Do you see how pride becomes bitterness? Do you see how anger, quickly kindled, rots in a person's heart and character? There is no joy for the person who's eaten alive by bitterness. While Mordecai lives, he thinks is the problem. While Mordecai lives, I can't enjoy any of it. I can't go to the feast tomorrow happy or joyful or glad because there's one man in the entire kingdom who won't bow down to me. Can I ask, who is your Mordecai? And then we see that he is easily persuaded. We saw earlier Ahasuerus acting on the word of his wife. Now it's Haman's turn. Because once he's finished pouring out his heart, his wife and his friends suggest something evil. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him in verse 14, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it." 50 cubits high, I'm reliably informed, is as high as a cricket pitch is wide. It could be exaggerated wording for the narrator to point out just how ludicrous Haman is acting at this time, but there's no reason in my mind that wouldn't be what Haman, this proud and boastful man, would want. The tallest gallows that have ever been made to hang my greatest headache, to embarrass him and to show to everyone that I've defeated him. Just remember, by the way, Haman has succeeded in creating a decree which he has published throughout the entire Persian Empire that in a year's time all the Jews are going to be annihilated, including Mordecai. But Mordecai is of such an annoyance to him that he can't wait for that. He's got to do it before the feast tomorrow. Haman personifies what the fool looks like. Someone easily angered, someone who doesn't deal with bitterness in their heart, and someone who is impatient. He stands as a warning to all of us that if we don't deal with anger, it will lead us to do great evil. He's a warning against those who are proud, who like to be honoured and hate it when they are dishonoured. He's a far cry from the Apostle Paul, who, when boasting about his own achievements, could say in Philippians 3, "Whatever gain I had, I counted loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ." Can you say the same? Or are you going home counting the things that you've achieved? And Christ doesn't feature on the list. Well, we come to the end of this passage and it's hard to know what to do because it's not particularly an uplifting end to the chapter, is it? And I was tempted to carry on preaching into chapter 6. But I decided against it. We're left wondering, aren't we? Where is God? Where is God in this? Because after all, we can admire Esther's wisdom and the things that she did, and we can see where this is going. But then, just as Esther seems to have the upper hand, we're told that this news about Haman, a more dangerous, a more urgent danger, comes onto the scene, and we leave it there. Where's God? Where is God in this? Well, again, God isn't mentioned. But do we not see his fingerprints? His fingerprints in the way that Esther again wins the favour of a king she hasn't seen for 30 days, who seems to have fallen out of sort of enjoyment of his wife. You see, the Bible tells us that the Lord holds the heart of the king in his hands, turning it where he wills. As Esther approaches him and appears in his presence, knowing that she could die, Ahasuerus, even Ahasuerus, this godless Persian king's heart, is in the hand of God, who turns it so that he favours Esther. We should seek to act wisely in a godless culture, but it's not enough. It's not enough. If you think you just act wisely and I'll be okay. Act wisely and bad things won't happen to me. Sadly, it will. Because we live in a fallen world where things don't work as you want them to. It's a world where it's been frustrated by sin. In an ideal world, act wisely and this good thing will happen. But we know from the book of Job, we know from the book of Ecclesiastes, you can act wisely, but something that you didn't see coming may befall you. So we need more than wisdom, we need to trust in God's sovereign power over godless authorities, over unwelcome circumstances. We need to trust that the Lord is in control. Believe in him and have confidence in him to carry on walking as he tells us to walk without flinching. But we also see, before I move there, don't we see an incredible amount of faith in Esther to act in this way? Peter highlighted it last week for us. Wasn't it an amazing statement of faith that Esther made, where she says, if I perish, I perish. And she follows through, trusting the Lord. And in this situation, at this time, the Lord's plans are for her to live. What about if she didn't? What about if Ahasuerus didn't extend his golden scepter? Is that any less the Lord's plan? Does that make God any less in control of the situation? No. It just means that the Lord is doing something different. And so we trust him. Our responsibility is to live according to his word. Our responsibility is to live according to his wisdom and trust him for the results. But we also see his fingerprints in allowing Haman to listen to his wife's terribly twisted advice. He is filled with pride, and while he's filled with pride, he's walking in opposition to the Lord. Because the Bible tells us that God lifts up the humble, but opposes the proud. Ironically, as we continue reading through Esther, everything that Haman boasts about in this chapter will, in a later chapter, be taken away from him and given into the hands of those he sought to destroy. Jesus says, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but forfeits his soul? Jesus says that the person who seeks to save their own life will lose it. Therefore, we should take heart. Here is a God who can reverse terrible situations for his people's good. Here is a God who can use terrible situations for his glory. So what do we do when confronted with godless people doing foolish things? Simple. Be wise and trust in the Lord. And leave the consequences to him. Because after all, he is a God who, whether he allows you to live or die, is a God who promises you the victory anyway. I just can't help but point this out. It's important when we read our Bibles to note numbers. I don't mean the book of Numbers, but numbers are important. Numbers of days are important. Some might tell me I'm reading too much into it, and that's their prerogative to do it, but I don't think it's accidental that on the third day, Esther puts on royalty. And it's the beginning of the end for the plans of the evil. On the third day, Jesus put on royalty, clothed in immortality, as he came out from that tomb, having defeated death. And though we do not yet see the defeat of death, because of what Christ has done, because Christ has risen and Christ has appeared before his Father in heaven, victory over the enemy, whether we live or whether we die, is assured. Amen.